Maya stepped off the transport shuttle, her military-issued duffel bag slung over one shoulder with practiced ease. The morning sun cast long shadows across the civilian landing pad, a stark contrast to the harsh artificial lighting of the battleship Vengeance, where she had spent the last 3 years. At 17, she had seen more combat than most seasoned soldiers would in their entire careers. The war had demanded everything from humanity, including their children. The peace treaty had been signed 6 months ago, officially ending the conflict that had raged across 12 star systems. Maya had been on the front lines when the ceasefire was announced, her plasma rifle still warm from the final engagement. Now, instead of enemy positions and tactical assessments, she faced something far more terrifying, returning to high school to complete her senior year. Her parents waited at the edge of the landing platform, their faces a mixture of joy and uncertainty. 3 years was a long time, especially when those years transformed a 14-year-old girl into a decorated war veteran. Her mother, Dr. Sarah, rushed forward first, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her daughter. Maya stiffened slightly at the contact, muscle memory making her scan the surrounding area for threats before forcing herself to relax into the hug. "My baby," her mother whispered, pulling back to examine Maya's face. The soft features of childhood had been replaced by sharp cheekbones and eyes that held depths no teenager should possess. A thin scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, a souvenir from an energy blade that had come too close during the Battle of Station. Her father, James, approached more cautiously. He had served in the early days of the war before an injury sent him home, and he recognized the 1,000-yard stare that flickered behind Maya's eyes. "Welcome home, soldier," he said simply, offering a crisp salute that Maya returned automatically before catching herself. "It's good to be back," Maya replied, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. Home was a concept she had almost forgotten. For 3 years, home had been whatever ship, bunker, or foxhole provided the most cover from enemy fire. The drive through suburban neighborhoods felt surreal. Maya found herself cataloging potential ambush points and defensive positions out of habit. The normalcy of it all, children playing in yards, neighbors chatting over fences, the complete absence of weapons or armor, seemed almost alien after the constant vigilance required in a war zone. "School starts Monday," her mother said, glancing at Maya through the mirror. "I know it might be an adjustment, but the counselors are prepared to help with the transition." Maya nodded, though internally she wondered what kind of preparation could possibly account for her situation. How do you explain to guidance counselors that you've commanded troops in battle, that you've made life-and-death decisions that saved thousands of lives, that the last time you sat in a classroom, you were worried about algebra tests instead of alien invasion fleets? Their house looked exactly as she remembered, though smaller somehow. Her room had been preserved like a shrine to her 14-year-old self, boy band posters, stuffed animals, and homework assignments she would never complete. Maya set her duffel bag on the bed and looked around at the remnants of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. That evening, her parents attempted to recreate a normal family dinner. They asked careful questions about her experiences, dancing around the obvious topics of combat and casualties. Maya found herself giving sanitized responses, editing out the blood and terror that had become routine. She didn't tell them about holding her dying squad leader in her arms on Titan Base, or about the night sweats that still woke her up screaming. Instead, she talked about the camaraderie among the troops and the satisfaction of serving her species. "Your old friends are excited to see you," her mother said, cutting into her thoughts. "Jessica called yesterday. She said the whole gang can't wait to catch up." Maya tried to smile, but the expression felt forced. Jessica and her friends would want to hear war stories, expecting tales of heroism and glory. They wouldn't want to hear about the child soldiers or the way plasma burns smelled, or how sometimes the only way to sleep was to count the faces of the dead instead of sheep. Sunday night came too quickly. Maya lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the alien silence of suburban peace. No artillery in the distance, no emergency klaxons, no of night patrols. Just the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional car passing on the street. She had spent so long sleeping in combat zones that the absence of danger felt more unsettling than its presence. When Monday morning arrived, Maya dressed in civilian clothes that felt strange and restrictive after years of military fatigues. She chose dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt, avoiding anything that might draw attention. Her parents offered to drive her, but she declined, preferring to walk the familiar route and acclimate herself to the environment. High school sprawled across several acres, its red brick buildings connected by covered walkways and surrounded by athletic fields. Students clustered in groups around the entrance, their voices carrying across the courtyard in a cacophony of teenage concerns, upcoming tests, weekend plans, relationship drama. Maya paused at the edge of the parking lot, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer normalcy of it all. A group of girls near the main entrance caught sight of her and began whispering excitedly. Maya recognized them as former classmates, though 3 years had changed them all. They had grown taller, their features more mature, but their eyes still held the innocent spark of youth that Maya had lost somewhere among the stars. "Maya, oh my God, is that really you?" Jessica Martinez broke away from the group and ran toward her, arms outstretched for a hug. Maya instinctively stepped back and raised her hands in a defensive position before catching herself and forcing her body to relax. "Sorry," she said quickly, trying to cover the awkward moment. "Just still getting used to being back." Jessica's enthusiasm dimmed slightly as she took in Maya's appearance. The scar, the way she held herself with military precision, the constant scanning of her surroundings. "You look so different. I mean, you look amazing, but different." The other girls gathered around, their chatter filling the air with questions about the war, about space travel, about what it was like to fight aliens. Maya answered as best she could, but she could see the disappointment in their faces when her responses lacked the excitement they expected. War wasn't an adventure story. It was survival, loss, and the kind of responsibility that aged you decades in months. The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, and Maya consulted her schedule. Advanced chemistry with Doctor. She remembered him as a nervous man who jumped at sudden noises. Maya wondered how he would react to having a combat veteran in his classroom. As she walked through the halls, Maya became acutely aware of how different she was from her classmates. They moved with the careless confidence of youth, laughing loudly, bumping into lockers, completely unaware of their surroundings in a way that would have gotten them killed in a war zone. Maya found herself unconsciously creating tactical assessments of the hallways, choke points, escape routes, potential cover positions. Doctor's classroom was on the second floor, overlooking the student parking lot. Maya chose a seat near the back, against the wall, where she could observe the entire room and maintain clear sight lines to both exits. Old habits from briefing rooms and command bunkers died hard. "Class, we have a special student joining us today," Doctor announced, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Maya has returned from her service in the conflict. Maya, would you like to tell us about your experiences?" Every head in the classroom turned to stare at her. Maya felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders, but this time it felt different. These weren't soldiers looking to her for orders that might mean the difference between life and death. These were teenagers curious about stories they had only seen in news feeds and entertainment programs. "I served on the front lines for 3 years," Maya said simply, her voice carrying the crisp authority she had developed when addressing troops. "It was an honor to defend humanity and Earth." "Did you kill any aliens?" a boy in the front row asked eagerly, his eyes bright with morbid curiosity. The question hit Maya like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, warriors falling under her plasma fire, the green blood that splattered across her armor, the clicking sounds they made as they died. She had killed dozens, maybe hundreds. She had kept count for the first year, but eventually the numbers became meaningless. "War isn't a game," she replied, her voice colder than she intended. "People die, good people on both sides." The classroom fell silent, the casual atmosphere evaporating under the weight of her words. Doctor cleared his throat nervously and began the day's lesson on molecular bonding, but Maya could feel the continued stares of her classmates. As the morning progressed, Maya found herself struggling with concepts that should have been simple. The academic material itself wasn't challenging, military education had been thorough and demanding. But the social dynamics of high school felt like navigating an alien culture. Students worried about grades and social status, while she had worried about keeping her squad alive. They gossiped about romantic relationships while she had formed bonds forged in combat that ran deeper than family. During lunch, Maya sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating the cafeteria food while observing the social ecosystem around her. Groups formed and reformed with fluid dynamics that reminded her of tactical formations, but without any apparent strategic purpose. The noise level was overwhelming after years of maintaining radio silence and communicating through hand signals. "Mind if I sit?" Maya looked up to see a tall boy with dark skin and intelligent eyes. She recognized him vaguely, if she remembered correctly. He had been in her geometry class freshman year, quiet and studious. "It's a free country," she replied, then immediately regretted the casualness of the phrase. Freedom wasn't free. It was paid for in blood and sacrifice and sleepless nights spent defending it. Sat down across from her, unwrapping a sandwich with careful deliberation. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for your service. My older brother David was stationed on Europa when they attacked. He didn't make it home." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loss that transcended the usual high school social barriers. "I'm sorry for your loss." What was his unit? 3rd Marine Regiment, Europa Defense Force. Maya nodded slowly. She had worked with Marine units several times, coordinating joint operations that required Army and Marine cooperation. Good soldiers, all of them. The 3rd was solid, professional. Your brother died serving with honor. Sighs brightened slightly. You knew them. We crossed paths during Operation Crimson Shield. The Marines held the eastern sector while my unit pushed through the mining tunnels. Without their support, we would have been overrun. Maya found herself speaking more freely than she had since returning home. Understood loss in a way her other classmates couldn't. "He wrote about the Army soldiers," said. "Said you guys were crazy brave, always volunteering for the most dangerous assignments." "Someone had to do it," Maya replied simply. "Might as well be us." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, eating their lunch while the chaos of teenage social life swirled around them. For the first time since returning home, Maya felt a small sense of connection to her surroundings. The afternoon brought more challenges. In English literature, they were discussing a poem about the glory of battle written by someone who had clearly never seen combat. Maya found herself biting her tongue as classmates romanticized war and heroism, their understanding filtered through entertainment and propaganda rather than experience. "Miss," the teacher, Mrs. Williams, called on her. "As someone with actual combat experience, what's your interpretation of this passage about the nobility of dying for one's country?" Maya stared at the poem for a long moment, remembering the faces of soldiers who had died under her command. Young men and women who would never see home again, whose families would receive folded flags and empty promises about their sacrifice meaning something. "There's nothing noble about dying," she said finally. "There's only necessity. We don't die for noble causes. We die because someone has to, and we hope it means something." The classroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Mrs. Williams looked flustered, clearly having expected a more patriotic response. Maya realized she had crossed some invisible line, spoken a truth that made people uncomfortable. "But surely you believe in the cause you fought for?" another student protested. "The freedom of humanity." "I believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves," Maya replied. "I believe in keeping my squad alive and completing the mission. The rest is politics." The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Maya gathered her belongings and headed for the exit, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of adolescent concerns and naive perspectives. But as she reached her locker, she found herself surrounded by a small crowd of students. "Is it true you were a sergeant at 15? One asked. "Did you really blow up a dreadnought?" Another chimed in. "What was it like living in space?" The questions came rapid fire, each one reducing her experiences to entertainment for their consumption. Maya felt the familiar tension building in her shoulders, the hypervigilance that had kept her alive during the war now triggered by teenage curiosity. "I need space," she said firmly, pushing through the crowd. But they followed her, persistent in their fascination with her story. "Come on, just tell us about one battle," a girl pleaded. "It must have been so exciting." Exciting? Maya stopped walking abruptly, memories flooding back unbidden. The screaming of wounded soldiers, the smell of burned flesh and melted metal. The weight of command when split-second decisions meant life or death for dozens of people. The nightmares that still woke her up in cold sweats. "You want to know what's exciting?" she said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of command authority that had once troops in desperate situations. "Watching your friends die because you made the wrong call. Holding pressure on a sucking chest wound while enemy fire pins you down. making the decision to sacrifice 2 soldiers to save 20 and then living with their faces forever. The crowd of students fell silent, their eager faces suddenly uncomfortable with the harsh reality behind their romanticized notions of war. War isn't exciting, Maya continued, her voice softer but no less intense. It's necessary sometimes, but it's never exciting. It's just something that has to be done and somebody has to do it. She walked away then, leaving them standing in the hallway with their questions unanswered and their fantasies challenged. As she pushed through the front doors of the school, Maya felt the weight of isolation settling around her like a familiar cloak. The walk home gave her time to process the day's events. High school wasn't just about academics or social dynamics. It was about learning to exist in a world where survival wasn't the primary concern, where people had the luxury of worrying about trivial things because someone else had fought to preserve that luxury. But Maya wasn't sure she remembered how to be trivial. 3 years of warfare had burned away the parts of her that might have cared about teenage drama or social hierarchies. She was a soldier trying to fit back into a world that no longer quite matched the shape of who she had become. That evening at dinner, her parents asked careful questions about her first day. Maya gave them the sanitized version. Classes were fine, the material wasn't too challenging, she was adjusting. She didn't tell them about the stares, the uncomfortable questions, or the growing sense that she was fundamentally different from everyone around her. "It takes time," her father said quietly, recognizing something in her expression. "When I came back from my deployment, everything felt off, like I was wearing the wrong size clothes." Maya nodded, grateful for his understanding even if his experience had been limited compared to hers. At least someone in the family had some concept of what it meant to transition from military to civilian life. After dinner, Maya retreated to her room and sat on her bed, surrounded by the artifacts of her younger self. The disconnect was jarring, stuffed animals and war medals existing in the same space, childhood innocence preserved while she had been transformed by experiences no child should have to endure. She pulled out her tablet and composed a message to Captain, her former commanding officer. He was on Earth now too, working with other veterans to establish support networks for returning soldiers. Maya had resisted reaching out before, wanting to prove she could handle the transition on her own. But after one day back in civilian life, she was beginning to understand that some battles couldn't be fought alone. "First day back at school," she typed. "Not what I expected. Harder than taking a fortified position in some ways. How are other veterans handling the transition?" The response came back quickly. "It's different for everyone, but high school might be the toughest assignment you've ever had. Civilians don't understand what we've been through, and they don't need to. Our job now is to learn how to live in the world we fought to protect, even if we don't quite fit into it anymore." Maya stared at the message for a long time, taking comfort in the knowledge that she wasn't alone in her struggles. Tomorrow would bring another day of navigating the complex social dynamics of high school, of translating her military experience into civilian context, of learning to be a teenager again when she felt decades older than her chronological age. But she had survived 3 years of interstellar warfare. She had led troops in combat, made decisions that affected the outcome of battles, and helped secure humanity's future among the stars. If she could do all that, she could figure out how to survive high school. It would just take a different kind of courage than she was used to. Outside her window, the suburban neighborhood settled into its peaceful evening routine. No explosions in the distance, no alert sirens, no need to sleep in armor with one hand on a weapon. Just the quiet normalcy of a world at peace, protected by soldiers like her who had paid the price for that tranquility. Maya, decorated war veteran and survivor of humanity's greatest conflict, prepared to face her greatest challenge yet. Learning how to be 17 again in a world that no longer quite knew what to do with child soldiers returning from the stars. The second week at High brought new challenges that Maya hadn't anticipated. Word of her military service had spread throughout the school like wildfire, creating an uncomfortable spotlight that followed her through the hallways. Some students treated her like a celebrity, others with fearful respect, and a few with outright suspicion. None of them seemed to see her as just another student trying to graduate. Maya had developed a routine to cope with the attention. She arrived at school early before the crowds gathered and used the time to scout the building layout more thoroughly. Old habits from military reconnaissance served her well as she mapped out quieter routes between classes, identified multiple exit strategies, and noted potential defensive positions. It wasn't that she expected combat, it was simply how her mind worked now. The academic work itself proved easier than the social dynamics. Years of military education had taught her discipline and efficient study methods that made high school coursework manageable. But the social aspects remained a minefield of unwritten rules and expectations that seemed to shift without warning. During her third day that week, Maya encountered her first real conflict. She was walking to her locker when she heard raised voices from around the corner. Training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify threats, determine if intervention was necessary. She approached cautiously and found 3 larger students surrounding the boy who had shared lunch with her. "Come on," one of them was saying, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that seemed to come naturally to teenage bullies. "Just admit your brother was a coward. Everybody knows the 3rd Marines ran when things got tough on Europa." Maya felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest. She had seen combat footage from Europa, had worked with survivors from that battle. The 3rd Marines hadn't run. They had held their positions against impossible odds, buying time for civilian evacuations with their lives. "That's not true," said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was outnumbered and clearly intimidated. "Sure it is," another bully laughed. "My dad says the Marines on Europa were just a bunch of kids playing soldier. Real warriors would have." "Your dad is wrong." The voice that cut through the hallway was Maya's, though it carried an authority that made all 4 boys freeze. She stepped around the corner with the fluid movement of someone accustomed to navigating combat zones, her presence somehow filling more space than her physical size should have allowed. "The 3rd Marine Regiment held Sector 7 for 18 hours against 3 assault divisions," she continued, her voice carrying the crisp precision of a military briefing. "They were outnumbered 12-1. They held until the last civilian transport cleared the evacuation zone, then conducted a fighting withdrawal that saved 3,000 lives." The lead bully, a thick-set boy named Jake, turned to face her with a sneer. "Oh look, it's our resident war hero, come to tell us more stories about how great you are." Maya studied him with the same clinical assessment she had once used to evaluate enemy positions. Jake was bigger than her, but he moved like someone who had never faced real violence. His aggression was all bluster, the kind of performative dominance that crumbled under actual pressure. "I'm not here to tell stories," she said simply. "I'm here to correct misinformation. The 3rd Marines died heroes. David died a hero. Anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or lying." Jake stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate her. "You think being in space for a few years makes you tough? This is high school, sweetheart. Different rules here." Maya almost smiled at that. If he only knew the kinds of rules she was accustomed to, rules where failure meant death, where decisions were measured in lives saved or lost, where respect was earned through competence under fire rather than social posturing. "You're right," she said, not backing down as Jake moved into her personal space. "Different rules. In the military, bullying is called hazing and it gets you court-martialed. Here, I suppose it just gets you labeled as someone who picks on people smaller than him." The hallway had filled with students drawn by the confrontation. Maya could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see if the war hero would live up to her reputation. But this wasn't about reputation or stories. This was about honoring the memory of soldiers who had died far from home. Jake's face flushed with anger. "You think you're better than us? Think your little war makes you special?" "No," Maya replied, her voice steady and calm. "I think David and soldiers like him deserve better than to have their sacrifice mocked by someone too comfortable to understand what they died for." The tension in the hallway was thick enough to cut. Maya could see Jake weighing his options, trying to decide if escalating further was worth the risk. She hoped he would make the smart choice, because while she had no intention of starting a fight, she was more than capable of ending one if necessary. "Whatever," Jake said finally, backing down with the grudging reluctance of someone who recognized they were outmatched. "Come on, guys, let's go find someone worth our time." As the bullies walked away, Maya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Violence had been avoided, which was always the preferred outcome. But the encounter had reminded her just how different her perspective was from her classmates. They saw high school social dynamics as important, while she saw them as trivial distractions from more serious concerns. "Thanks," said quietly once they were alone. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Maya replied. Your brother served with honor. That means something, even if not everyone understands it. Word of the hallway confrontation spread quickly through the school's social networks. By lunch, Maya found herself the center of even more attention, with students approaching to either congratulate her for standing up to Jake or to probe for more details about her military service. She deflected most of the questions and sought refuge in the library during lunch periods, finding solace among the books where conversations were discouraged. The library became her sanctuary. Mrs. Anderson, the elderly librarian, seemed to understand Maya's need for quiet space and never pressed her for conversation. Maya used the time to research college applications and military academy opportunities, trying to plan a future that would make use of her unique experience and training. It was during one of these lunch periods that she encountered Alex, a sophomore who shared her love of military history. Alex was small for his age, with thick glasses and an encyclopedic knowledge of historical battles. He approached Maya's table with obvious nervousness but determined purpose. "Excuse me," he said quietly, clutching a thick book about the Battle of Midway. "I heard you served in the war. I'm really interested in military strategy and tactics. Could I ask you some questions?" Maya looked up from her tablet, studying the earnest face of the younger student. Unlike the sensation seekers who usually approached her, Alex seemed genuinely interested in learning rather than collecting stories to impress his friends. "What kind of questions?" she asked carefully. "Well, I've been reading about historical battles, but I've never talked to someone who actually participated in modern warfare. How do you adapt classical tactical principles to three-dimensional space combat? How do you maintain unit cohesion when your battlefield spans multiple planets?" For the first time since returning to school, Maya found herself engaged in a conversation that actually interested her. Alex's questions were thoughtful and demonstrated real understanding of military principles. She began explaining how space warfare had evolved from historical precedents, how commanders adapted classical strategies to account for zero-gravity environments and faster-than-light communication delays. "The key is understanding that every environment requires different tactics," she explained, sketching diagrams on a piece of paper. "On station, we were fighting in close quarters through mining tunnels. Classical infantry tactics applied, but during the Battle of the Asteroid Belt, we were coordinating across millions of cubic kilometers of space. That required entirely different approaches." Alex listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions that showed he was processing the information rather than just collecting anecdotes. Their conversation stretched through the entire lunch period, and for the first time since returning home, Maya felt like she was talking to someone who understood the professional aspects of military service rather than just the sensational elements. Could we talk again tomorrow?" Alex asked as the bell rang. "I have so many more questions." Maya surprised herself by agreeing. Teaching someone who actually wanted to learn felt productive in a way that her regular classes didn't. It also gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing since her return to civilian life. The afternoon brought chemistry lab, where Maya found herself paired with Jennifer, a quiet girl who seemed intimidated by Maya's reputation. They were supposed to be analyzing molecular structures, but Jennifer kept stealing nervous glances at her lab partner as if expecting Maya to suddenly start barking military orders. "Just follow the procedure in the manual," Maya said gently, recognizing the girl's nervousness. "Chemistry is all about precision and following protocols, not that different from military procedures, really." Jennifer relaxed slightly at Maya's normal tone. "I've never met anyone who was in an actual war before. It must have been terrifying." Maya considered the comment while measuring out chemical compounds. Terror was certainly part of combat, but it wasn't the dominant emotion most people imagined. Fear was just another variable to manage, like ammunition supplies or communication delays. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but mostly you're too busy to be scared. When people are depending on you to make the right decisions, you focus on the mission instead of the fear." "I don't think I could ever be that brave," Jennifer said softly. "Bravery isn't about not being scared," Maya replied, adjusting the flame on their burner with practiced precision. "It's about doing what needs to be done despite being scared. Everyone has that capacity, they just don't know it until they're tested." Their experiment proceeded smoothly, with Maya's methodical approach to following procedures helping Jennifer gain confidence in the lab work. By the end of class, Jennifer was smiling and chatting more naturally, having discovered that the famous war veteran was actually just a teenager trying to pass chemistry. The day's final class was American history, where they were studying World War II. Mr. had obviously restructured his lesson plans to include more recent conflicts, and Maya suspected she was the reason for the change. The class was discussing the strategic implications of the D-Day landings when he called on her for perspective. "Miss, how do modern amphibious assaults compare to historical examples like Normandy?" Maya paused, considering how to explain space-to-planet assault operations in terms that would make sense to students studying centuries-old battles. "The principles are similar," she said finally. "You're still trying to establish a beachhead in hostile territory, secure landing zones, and build up forces faster than the enemy can respond. But modern warfare adds vertical dimensions and technological factors that complicate everything." "Can you give us a specific example?" Mr. prompted. "During the liberation of Titan Base, we had to assault a fortified position that could fire on our landing craft from multiple directions. The challenge was coordinating simultaneous attacks from orbital platforms, atmosphere-capable fighters, and ground forces. Each element had different capabilities and limitations, but they all had to work together to overwhelm the defenses." A student raised her hand. "How many people were involved in something like that?" Maya did quick mental calculations. "Our battle group included about 15,000 personnel across all services and platforms. The actual assault phase involved maybe 3,000 ground troops and another 1,000 in air support." The numbers created a moment of silence as students tried to comprehend the scale of operations Maya had participated in. For her, it had been just another mission. For them, it was an almost unimaginable responsibility for someone their age to have carried. As class ended, Mr. approached her desk. "Maya, I hope you don't mind me incorporating your experiences into our discussions. The students are getting perspectives on warfare that they could never get from textbooks." "It's fine," Maya replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Each time she shared details about her service, it seemed to emphasize how different she was from her classmates rather than helping her integrate with them. The walk home that afternoon gave Maya time to reflect on her progress. 2 weeks into her return to high school, she was beginning to understand that the challenge wasn't academic. It was social and psychological. She had to learn how to exist in a world where the stakes were lower, where mistakes didn't cost lives, where the casual concerns of teenagers were valid even if they seemed trivial compared to her experiences. At dinner, her parents tried to engage her in conversation about normal teenage activities. Had she thought about prom? Was she interested in joining any clubs? Did she want to attend Friday night's football game? Maya answered politely, but the questions felt like they were about someone else's life. "You know," her mother said carefully, "Dr. Martinez mentioned that the school has a support group for students dealing with trauma. It might be helpful to talk to other people who understand difficult experiences." Maya looked up sharply. The suggestion felt like an accusation that she wasn't handling things well, though she knew her mother meant well. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the response that had become reflexive whenever anyone suggested she might need help. "Of course you are," her father interjected. "But sometimes it helps to talk to people who had similar experiences. Not necessarily military experiences, but any kind of major life change or challenge." That evening, Maya found herself thinking about her father's words. She had resisted reaching out for support, viewing it as a sign of weakness rather than a practical resource. But military training had taught her to use every available asset to complete the mission. If the mission now was successful reintegration into civilian life, maybe she needed to reconsider her approach. She sent another message to Captain. "How important is civilian counseling for adjustment? I'm managing okay, but my parents think I should talk to someone." His response was immediate and direct. "Critical. Military counselors understand the service experience, but civilian counselors understand the world you're trying to fit back into. You need both perspectives. Don't let pride get in the way of mission success." Maya stared at the message for a long time. Mission success. That was language she understood. If successful civilian reintegration was the mission, then she needed to approach it with the same professional competence she had brought to military operations. That meant using all available resources, including professional counseling, even if it felt uncomfortable. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. Maya arrived at school to find a news crew setting up equipment in the parking lot. Someone had apparently contacted local media about the decorated teen veteran attending high, and they wanted to interview her about her experiences and transition back to civilian life. Maya felt her blood pressure spike as she saw the cameras and reporters. Military media training had taught her how to handle interviews, but those had been controlled situations with clear objectives. This felt more like an ambush, designed to extract emotional content for public consumption rather than convey useful information. Principal Watson intercepted her before she reached the building. "Maya, these reporters are here to do a story about your service and return to school. I told them you would need to make your own decision about participating." "I decline," Maya said immediately. The last thing she needed was more attention, more questions, more people treating her like a curiosity rather than a student. "Are you sure? This could be a positive way to share your story and maybe help other veterans." Maya considered the suggestion but ultimately shook her head. Her story wasn't ready to be public property, and she wasn't prepared to become a poster child for teen veterans. "I'm sure. I'm here to finish school, not to be interviewed about the war." Principal Watson nodded with understanding. "I'll have them moved off school property. They can't force you to talk to them." As Maya entered the building, she noticed increased security presence and more staff members monitoring the hallways. The unwanted media attention had created additional complications for everyone involved. She felt guilty about the disruption, but also frustrated that her presence continued to be a source of problems rather than just normal student life. First period proceeded normally until halfway through class when a student aide delivered a message requesting Maya's presence in the guidance office. She found Mrs. Henderson, the head counselor, waiting with a concerned expression and a manila folder thick with paperwork. "Maya, I wanted to follow up on your adjustment to school," Mrs. Henderson began. "Your teachers report that you're doing excellent work academically, but there are some concerns about social integration." "What kind of concerns?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Well, you tend to isolate yourself during unstructured time. You don't participate in group activities or casual conversations. Some teachers worry that you're not forming appropriate peer relationships." Maya almost laughed at the clinical language being used to describe what she considered survival instincts. Of course, she isolated herself. Crowds meant exposure to multiple potential threats. Of course, she avoided casual conversations. They were inefficient uses of time that revealed personal information to people who hadn't earned that trust. "I'm not here to make friends," she said finally. "I'm here to graduate." "But social development is an important part of the high school experience," Mrs. Henderson protested. "These are formative years for learning how to interact with peers, develop relationships, and participate in community activities." Maya understood what the counselor was saying, but it felt irrelevant to her situation. She had already learned how to interact with peers in life-and-death situations where trust was earned through competence and reliability. She had already participated in community activities, defending humanity from extinction. The artificial social environment of high school felt like regression rather than development. "Mrs. Henderson," Maya said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not a typical student. My formative years were spent in combat zones. I've already learned how to work with teams, how to earn trust, and how to contribute to important causes. High school social dynamics feel trivial in comparison." The counselor looked uncomfortable with Maya's directness. "I understand that you've had extraordinary experiences, but it's important not to let those experiences prevent you from engaging with normal teenage development." "What if normal teenage development isn't appropriate for me anymore?" Maya asked. "What if I've already developed past that stage?" The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the fundamental disconnect between Maya's reality and the educational system's expectations. How do you force someone back into adolescent social patterns when they've already assumed adult responsibilities under extreme conditions? Mrs. Henderson made notes in her folder, clearly struggling with how to address Maya's situation. "I'm going to recommend that you consider joining at least one extracurricular activity, something where you can interact with other students in a more relaxed environment." Maya agreed to consider the suggestion, though privately she doubted any high school activity would feel relaxed compared to her previous experiences. As she left the guidance office, She reflected on the growing pressure to conform to civilian expectations that didn't quite fit who she had become. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Maya found herself increasingly aware of the observation from teachers and staff. They were monitoring her behavior, looking for signs of problems or progress, treating her more like a case study than a student. The attention was well-intentioned but uncomfortable, adding another layer of complexity to her already challenging reintegration. During her lunch period in the library, Alex approached with obvious excitement. "I researched everything you told me yesterday," he said, spreading books and printed articles across the table. "I found accounts of the Battle of Titan Base and the station assault. Were you really part of the unit that held the mining complex for 3 days?" Maya looked at the materials Alex had gathered, official reports, news articles, and historical analyses of battles she had lived through. Seeing her experiences reduced to text and statistics felt strange, like reading about someone else's life. "Yeah," she said simply, "that was my unit. The reports say your squad was cut off behind enemy lines for 72 hours with limited supplies and no communication. How did you survive?" The question brought back memories Maya tried to keep locked away. Hunger, thirst, the constant fear of discovery, the responsibility of keeping 12 soldiers alive when everything went wrong. But Alex wasn't asking for entertainment value. He was trying to understand tactical principles and decision-making under pressure. "You adapt," Maya explained. "You prioritize objectives, conserve resources, and maintain discipline. Most importantly, you never give up hope that the situation can improve." She spent the rest of lunch period walking Alex through the tactical decisions that had kept her unit alive during those 3 days. It felt good to discuss her experiences with someone who appreciated the professional competence required rather than just the dramatic elements. That afternoon's encounter with Jake's group proved that the bullying situation hadn't been resolved by one confrontation. They didn't approach her directly, but Maya noticed them targeting other students who couldn't defend themselves as effectively. The pattern was familiar from military intelligence. When you neutralize one threat, adversaries often shift to softer targets rather than abandoning their objectives entirely. Maya found herself in an uncomfortable position. She couldn't fight everyone's battles for them, but she also couldn't ignore systematic bullying when she had the capability to address it. The question was whether intervention would help or simply escalate the situation. She decided to try an indirect approach. During study hall, she approached Jake directly, not with confrontation but with a proposition. She said, sliding into the desk next to his, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." Jake looked wary, probably expecting another lecture about military service and heroism. "You mentioned that high school has different rules than the military," Maya continued. "You're right, but some principles are universal, leadership, for example." "What are you getting at?" Jake asked suspiciously. "I'm getting at the fact that you have natural leadership ability. People follow you, respect your opinion, look to you for direction. That's a valuable skill." Jake's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. Maya could see that her assessment had surprised him. No one had ever framed his dominant personality as a positive leadership trait. "But leadership comes with responsibility," she continued. "In the military, leaders are judged by how well they take care of their people, not by how effectively they intimidate them. Real leaders lift people up instead of tearing them down." She left him with that thought, not waiting for a response or trying to extract promises of changed behavior. The seed was planted. Whether it would grow depended on Jake's character and willingness to see himself as something more than a high school bully. Walking home that afternoon, Maya reflected on her evolving understanding of her mission at High. It wasn't just about completing academic requirements or surviving until graduation. It was about finding ways to apply her military experience constructively in a civilian environment, using her unique capabilities to solve problems and help people without creating additional disruption. The challenge was learning to be a leader without being in command, to serve without wearing a uniform, to protect people who didn't even realize they needed protection. It was a different kind of warfare, one fought with influence and example rather than weapons and tactics. But it was still warfare in its own way, and Maya had never lost a war yet. 3 months into the school year, Maya had established something resembling a routine at High. The initial curiosity about her military service had faded into background awareness. allowing her to move through the halls without constant stares and questions. She had found her niche among a small group of students who appreciated her direct communication style and practical approach to problems, even if they didn't fully understand her experiences. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Maya arrived early, completed her homework review in the library, and prepared for another day of navigating the complex social dynamics of civilian education. But as she walked toward her first period class, she noticed something was wrong. The hallways buzzed with unusual energy. Students clustered in tight groups, their conversations carried an edge of fear rather than typical teenage drama. Teachers moved with purpose, their expressions grim as they spoke in hushed tones. Maya's combat-trained senses immediately went on alert, recognizing the signs of a developing crisis. "Did you hear?" Jessica Martinez appeared at Maya's elbow, her face pale with anxiety. "There's been another attack, though they're saying the peace treaty was a lie." Maya felt ice settle in her stomach. "What kind of attack? Where?" "Station, the news reports say it's completely destroyed, thousands dead." Jessica's voice shook as she delivered the information. "They're saying it might not be over after all." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Station was a civilian research facility, home to families and scientists working on terraforming projects. If they had attacked it, they were either rogue elements operating outside the peace treaty or the entire armistice had been a strategic deception. Maya's mind immediately shifted into military analysis mode. If the war was resuming, how long before Earth's defense grid was activated? How quickly could reserve units be recalled to active duty? What was the strategic significance of targeting stations specifically? "Maya," Jessica's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maya forced herself to focus on the present moment, pushing down the tactical assessments that wanted to dominate her thinking. "I need to see the news reports. What are they saying about casualties and response?" They made their way to the commons area where a large screen displayed continuous news coverage. Students gathered in clusters, some crying, others arguing about what the attack meant for Earth's security. Maya pushed through the crowd until she could see the images being broadcast, the twisted wreckage of what had been a peaceful research station, rescue ships searching for survivors among the debris. The news anchor's voice carried the crisp professionalism of wartime reporting. "Preliminary reports suggest that multiple assault ships appeared without warning in the system. The attack lasted less than 30 minutes, but the station's defensive capabilities were overwhelmed. Military analysts are calling this either a violation of the peace treaty or evidence that radical factions within society have rejected the armistice." Maya studied the tactical information being displayed, ship classifications, attack patterns, response times. Her military training automatically processed the data, looking for strategic implications and patterns that might predict future attacks. But what struck her most was the realization that while she had been playing high school student, real soldiers were still dying in space. "Attention students," Principal Watson's voice echoed through the commons via the intercom system. "Please report to your first period classes immediately. Counselors will be available throughout the day for anyone who needs support processing today's tragic news." Maya found herself in advanced physics, but the planned lesson on quantum mechanics was abandoned in favor of open discussion about current events. Doctor, the physics teacher, tried to maintain some semblance of educational value by connecting the discussion to principles of interstellar warfare and defensive technology, but most students were too emotionally affected to focus on academic content. "Miss," Doctor said carefully, "given your military experience, do you have insights into what this attack might mean strategically?" Maya hesitated before answering. Part of her wanted to provide the kind of tactical analysis that would help her classmates understand the broader implications. But another part recognized that her perspective would only emphasize her fundamental difference from her civilian peers. "It's too early to draw conclusions," she said diplomatically. "Military analysis requires more information than we have from preliminary news reports." But privately, Maya was drawing plenty of conclusions. The attack pattern suggested either a probing action designed to test Earth's response capabilities or the opening move of a renewed offensive. Either way, it meant the peace she had been learning to live in might be temporary. After class, Alex approached her with obvious excitement mixed with concern. "Maya, if the war is starting again, will you re-enlist? I mean, they must need experienced soldiers like you. The question hit closer to home than Maya wanted to admit. Part of her had felt relief when the peace treaty was signed, grateful for the chance to return to something resembling normal life. But a larger part had felt displaced, like a soldier without a war to fight. If hostilities were resuming, would she have an obligation to return to service? I don't know, she answered honestly. It depends on a lot of factors we don't understand yet. The day continued with classes disrupted by constant news updates and emotional reactions from students and staff. Maya found herself in the unusual position of being the only person in school with actual combat experience, which made her both a source of information and a reminder of the harsh realities that most people preferred not to think about. During lunch, she sought refuge in the library as usual, but even Mrs. Anderson seemed unable to maintain the usual peaceful atmosphere. Students clustered around computer terminals, frantically searching for updates about the attack and speculation about what it might mean for Earth's security. Maya pulled out her personal communicator and composed a message to Captain. Sir, requesting status update on station incident. Civilian reports are inconsistent. Are reserve units being activated? The response came back within minutes. Situation still developing. Appears to be rogue faction, not treaty violation by main government. Earth Defense Force on high alert but not mobilizing reserves yet. Stay ready but maintain current assignment. Stay ready but maintain current assignment. Maya understood the subtext. Continue with civilian reintegration until called upon, but be prepared to return to service if the situation deteriorated. It was exactly the kind of strategic ambiguity that military life had trained her to handle, but it made planning for her civilian future more complicated. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to High. Colonel Sarah Martinez, a recruiting officer for the Earth Defense Force, had come to address student concerns about the attack and discuss military service opportunities for those interested in contributing to Earth's defense. Maya found herself in the auditorium with the rest of the student body, listening to familiar rhetoric about service, sacrifice, and the importance of protecting humanity's future among the stars. Colonel Martinez was competent and professional, delivering the kind of presentation that had convinced Maya to enlist 3 years earlier. The Earth Defense Force is looking for young people with the courage and dedication to serve, Colonel Martinez announced. We offer excellent training, educational opportunities, and the chance to be part of something larger than yourselves. Maya watched her classmates' reactions to the presentation. Some seemed inspired by the call to service, their eyes bright with the kind of patriotic enthusiasm that felt familiar. Others appeared frightened by the reminder that Earth's security remained uncertain despite the peace treaty. After the presentation, Colonel Martinez noticed Maya in the audience and approached her directly. Sergeant, isn't it? I've read about your service record. Impressive work during the Titan base siege. Thank you, Colonel, Maya replied, falling automatically into military bearing despite being in civilian clothes. Have you given thought to re-enlistment? With your experience and leadership capabilities, you could easily qualify for officer training. The Defense Force needs people with your background. The offer was tempting in ways Maya hadn't expected. Military service had been difficult and traumatic, but it had also provided clear purpose and measurable achievement. The prospect of returning to an environment where her skills were valued and her experience was an asset rather than a barrier held obvious appeal. I haven't made any decisions yet, ma'am, Maya said carefully. I'm focused on completing my education right now. Colonel Martinez handed her a card with contact information. Think about it. Your country invested significant resources in your training and development. It would be unfortunate to waste that investment on civilian pursuits when you could be serving a greater cause. As Maya walked home that afternoon, she found herself wrestling with questions she had been avoiding since her return to civilian life. What did she owe to the military that had trained her? What responsibilities came with her unique experience and capabilities? Was it selfish to pursue personal goals when humanity might need her skills again? The conversation at dinner that evening was dominated by discussion of the station attack and its implications for the family's safety. Maya's parents asked careful questions about her assessment of the situation, clearly hoping for reassurance that their daughter's war was truly over. The preliminary reports suggest it was an isolated incident, Maya told them, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. Probably a radical faction operating without government approval. But what if it's not? Her mother asked. What if this is the beginning of a new phase of the conflict? Maya considered the question carefully before answering. Then humanity will respond appropriately. We've proven we can defend ourselves when necessary. That night, Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, wrestling with the decision that she knew was coming. If the attacks continued, if Earth needed her skills again, would she answer the call? Part of her felt guilty for even considering it. Her parents had already sacrificed so much, and they deserved to have their daughter home and safe. But another part of her missed the clarity of military service, the sense of purpose that came with protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. High school felt like playing dress-up compared to the importance of defending humanity's future among the stars. The next few days brought additional news that made the decision more urgent. 2 more attacks had occurred. A supply convoy was ambushed near the asteroid belt, and a patrol ship was destroyed while investigating unusual energy signatures in the outer colonies. The pattern suggested coordinated action rather than random violence by rogue elements. Maya found herself paying more attention to the news than her schoolwork, analyzing attack patterns and trying to predict where the enemy might strike next. Her military training made it impossible to ignore the strategic implications, even while her parents hoped the violence would remain distant and abstract. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult day at school. Jake, apparently inspired by the renewed threat of war, had escalated his bullying behavior and was targeting students with connections to military families. Maya discovered him cornering Alex, demanding to know whether Alex's deceased brother had died like a coward on Europa. Maya's intervention was swift and decisive. "That's enough," she said, her voice carrying the kind of command authority that made Jake step backward automatically. "Oh, look, it's the space soldier again," Jake sneered, trying to recover his composure. "Come to tell us more stories about how great you are." "No," Maya replied simply. "I've come to give you one opportunity to walk away before you say something that crosses a line you can't come back from." Something in her tone must have communicated the seriousness of the warning, because Jake hesitated. But teenage pride and peer pressure proved stronger than survival instincts. "You think your little war makes you tough," he said, pushing closer to Maya. "You're nothing special, just another kid who got lucky and came home when better soldiers didn't." The hallway fell silent as students recognized they were witnessing something more serious than typical high school drama. Maya felt the familiar cold focus settling over her mind, the combat mindset that had kept her alive through 3 years of warfare. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "Better soldiers than me didn't come home. David was a better soldier than me. So were Lieutenant Carter and Sergeant Williams and about 100 other people whose names you'll never know. They died so you could stand here in safety and insult their memory." Maya stepped closer and Jake instinctively moved backward. "But you're wrong about the rest. My war didn't make me tough. It revealed that I was already tough enough to do what needed to be done. The question is, what are you tough enough to do besides pick on people smaller than you?" The confrontation ended when Principal Watson arrived and dispersed the crowd. But Maya knew something fundamental had changed. She had stopped pretending to be a normal high school student and embraced her identity as a soldier temporarily assigned to civilian duty. That evening, she made the call she had been avoiding. Captain answered on the first ring, as if he had been expecting her contact. "Sir, I want to discuss re-enlistment options," Maya said without preamble. "I was wondering when you'd call," replied. "The recent attacks have convinced a lot of veterans to return to service. What's your situation?" Maya explained her struggles with civilian reintegration, her sense of displaced purpose, and her growing conviction that her skills were needed more in military service than in high school. Captain listened without interruption, then provided the guidance she needed. "Maya, you're 18 now, so the decision is entirely yours. But consider this. The military will always need experienced soldiers. High school ends in 6 months. Why not finish what you started, get your diploma, and then make the choice about your future with a complete education behind you?" The suggestion made sense on multiple levels. Maya could complete her civilian education, prove to herself and others that she was capable of succeeding in peacetime pursuits, and then choose military service from a position of strength rather than as an escape from civilian challenges. "Besides," continued, If the situation deteriorates significantly, reserves will be called up regardless. But if it stabilizes, you'll have more options available with a completed education. That night, Maya made her decision. She would finish high school, not because it was easy or because she enjoyed it, but because completing difficult missions was what soldiers did. She would prove that a warrior could succeed in any environment, whether it was a battlefield in space or a classroom in suburban America. The next morning at school, Maya approached Mrs. Henderson in the guidance office with a specific request. "I want to establish a military history club," she announced. "Something for students interested in learning about strategy, leadership, and service." Mrs. Henderson looked surprised but pleased. "That's wonderful, Maya. It's exactly the kind of engagement we've been hoping to see from you. What prompted this decision?" "I realized that running away from who I am isn't helping anyone," Maya replied. "I'm a soldier. That doesn't mean I can't be a student too, but it means I should use my experience to contribute something valuable." Within a week, Maya had organized the High Military History Club. The founding members included Alex, and surprisingly, Jennifer from her chemistry class. Even more surprisingly, Jake showed up to the first meeting. "I want to understand what makes someone willing to fight for other people," he said awkwardly when Maya questioned his presence. "Maybe learn something about real leadership instead of just whatever it is I've been doing." The club became Maya's vehicle for translating military experience into civilian context. She taught leadership principles, strategic thinking, and the importance of service without glorifying violence or minimizing the costs of warfare. Students learned about historical battles, but more importantly, they learned about the character traits that separated heroes from victims. As winter approached, the strategic situation in space stabilized. The attacks had indeed been the work of radical factions within society, and the main government was cooperating with Earth forces to eliminate the rogue elements. The immediate threat to Earth's security diminished, but the reminder of humanity's vulnerability remained. Maya found herself settling into a new routine that balanced her military identity with her civilian responsibilities. She still struggled with some aspects of teenage social life, but she no longer felt the need to hide who she was or pretend to be someone else. She was a soldier completing a civilian mission, and she approached both roles with the same professional competence. Her parents noticed the change and seemed relieved that their daughter had found a way to integrate her military experience with her civilian life rather than choosing one over the other. Maya was still their child, but she was also a veteran whose experiences had shaped her in ways they might never fully understand. The Military History Club grew throughout the semester, attracting students who were interested in service, leadership, or simply understanding the world beyond their suburban experience. Maya discovered that teaching others about military principles helped her process her own experiences and find meaning in her transition to civilian life. One afternoon, while reviewing college applications, Maya received a message that made her smile. It was from a former squad mate who had also returned to Earth and was struggling with civilian reintegration. "Heard about your military history club from Captain," the message read. "Any chance you could help me start something similar at my school? Turns out there are a lot of us trying to figure out how to be veterans and students at the same time." Maya realized that her struggle with reintegration wasn't unique. Thousands of young veterans were facing similar challenges as they tried to find their place in the peaceful world they had fought to protect. Her experience at High, difficult as it had been, might serve as a model for helping other veterans make the transition. She began corresponding with veterans at schools across the country, sharing strategies for civilian reintegration and helping them establish their own programs for translating military experience into educational success. What had started as personal survival became a mission to help others navigate the same challenges. By spring semester, Maya had found her rhythm. She maintained excellent grades, led a successful extracurricular program, and had been accepted to several colleges with strong ROTC programs. She had proven to herself and others that a warrior could succeed in any environment, but more importantly, she had learned to be proud of her military service without letting it define her limitations. The graduation ceremony took place on a beautiful May afternoon, with families gathered to celebrate their children's academic achievements. Maya walked across the stage to receive her diploma with the same precision and pride she had once brought to military formations. But this time, the applause came from classmates who had learned to see her as both a decorated veteran and a fellow student. Her valedictorian speech, an honor she had earned through academic excellence despite her challenging transition, Maya spoke about the importance of service in all its forms. "We are all called to serve something larger than ourselves," she said, looking out at her classmates and their families. "Whether that service takes the form of military duty, education, community involvement, or simply treating others with respect and dignity, we all have a role to play in building the kind of world we want to live in." After the ceremony, as families gathered for pictures and celebrations, Maya found herself surrounded by members of her military history club. They had become more than students to her. They were the next generation of leaders who would face whatever challenges the future held for humanity. "So what's next?" Alex asked. "Are you going to accept that appointment to the Space Academy?" Maya smiled, looking up at the clear sky where humanity's future among the stars awaited. "I think so. But this time, I'll be going as someone who understands that being a warrior isn't just about fighting enemies. It's about protecting the things that matter most: family, community, and the possibility of peace." She had withstood the battlefield and survived the return to civilian life. More importantly, she had learned that true strength came not from choosing between her military identity and her civilian aspirations, but from integrating both into a life of service that honored her experiences while embracing her future. The peace treaty with the was holding, but Maya knew that humanity's greatest challenges might still lie ahead. When those challenges came, she would be ready, not just as a soldier, but as an educated leader who understood both the necessity of warfare and the value of the peace it was meant to protect. As she stood with her classmates on the football field where she had once felt so out of place, Maya realized that she had finally completed her most difficult mission, learning how to be both a warrior and a human being in a world complex enough to require both.